You did, Anne.
There you go.
You are on top of things. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So last month we had Richard Messick, and I hope if you weren't here last month that you got to view the video, because he really did an outstanding job. It was really quite good and quite awful at the same time, if you know what I mean. We did record it, so if you missed it. And now I'd appreciate it if you all would mute yourselves, and Jerry Filkowski is going to lead us in prayer.
Just contemplate these words for a couple seconds by Sister Thea Bowman. What does it mean to be Black and Catholic? It means that I came to my church fully functioning. I bring myself, my Black self, all that I am, all that I have, all that I hope to become. I bring my whole history, my traditions, my experience, my culture, and gifts to the church. So let us pray. Gracious God, imbue us with the grace and perseverance that you gave your servant, Sister Theo. For in turbulent times of racial injustice, she sought equity, peace, and reconciliation. In times of intolerance and ignorance, she brought wisdom, awareness, unity, and charity. In times of pain and sickness and suffering, Sister Theo taught us how to live fully until called home to the land of promise. May we all imitate her goodness and holiness, and please let a wise church acknowledge Sister Thea Bowman, who walked, served, sang, and prayed among us. God bless Sister Saint Thea Bowman. God bless us. Amen.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And that reminds me of the Mass, and there were a lot of people at the second Mass too, the year anniversary. So it was actually didn't you all think it was really a nice event?
It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And there were 3 inner city choirs that sang at one time, a gospel choir. I think St. Anne's was rocking on its foundation. It was just, they were amazing. Bishop Ricard was there, Joe Muth was there. And the choirs in themselves, it was just really, I think, heartwarming to be there with all the posters of the saints who are just waiting for the church to catch up with the rest of us and know that they're already saints.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And the 3 choirs were from that pastorate, the 3 parishes from the pastorate, and they were outstanding. So Skip, I see we have another room we're trying. So we've gotten to the part where Jerry Filkowski did the prayer for us.
Oh, I missed it.
So, well, we'll stay on afterwards. She can give it to you because it was lovely.
I know it was. I love her prayer.
Oh.
I'm scared to talk. I may break.
No, you're doing great. It's working. So you take it away.
Okay, I'm in the kitchen. So, well, hello, everybody. I hope I'm here with you for the night. So last month, we welcomed Richard Messick, and he shared with us his really fantastic amount of knowledge about enforced servitude and the slave trade in Baltimore. In case you missed it, we did record it. I wasn't able to be with you last month, but I did hear the recording and view it. It was fantastic, and I learned so much that I didn't know, and even about specific streets and addresses in Baltimore where enslavement was, really being enforced. So anyway, Jerry's done the prayer, so don't mute yourselves. And Jerry, thanks again. As mentioned in previous meetings, our future topics will all be driven by all of us, especially you. What you saw, what you read, what you've heard, that you want to share with the rest of us so that we can have good discussions. Thanks to Peggy, we sent out links to the South Baltimore Community Land Trust's celebration registration. We also sent a zero waste webinar. As I mentioned before, Richard Messick's informative presentation from last month, and several PBS specials on Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Henry Gates's Making Black America Through the Grapevine, and a subsequent link for Network's White Supremacy and American Christianity. That was featuring Robert Jones, who wrote our book about Christianity, White Too Long, and also Dr. Brian Massingale, who's a Jesuit. I'm going to say more about that later on in the evening together, because I happened to catch it from the link that was sent to me by Jody. It's fantastic, and we have an idea that we are going to present to you later on that we think you'll really like and support, that will feature a representation of this. So we hope that you were able to view some of these outstanding presentations. And so we're going to open the floor now for anything you would like to share about what you've been reading, hearing, viewing, discussing. Maybe it will help to guide you as you're preparing to share. Maybe you want to share what impacted or even shocked you most about what you read or saw or heard. What moves you the most? What pillars of systemic racism did you see involved in what it was you were studying or reading or viewing? So if that will help to prompt anyone to get us started, we're ready. And I want to shut up.
I can jump in if you guys are too shy at the moment.
And also, because I'm an old teacher, I've learned the 18-second wait, so I can outwait.
Oh, I didn't wait long enough. I'll wait 18 seconds then.
I'll go ahead.
Okay,
So
great.
great, Ann.
I've been watching Henry Gates's chapter, or episodes, and I haven't gotten through all of them yet, but I'm just, I don't know, astounded really at the networking and the organization and all of the activities, that were going on behind the veil, as he called it. And I just think it's totally amazing. I had no clue, as a Southern, white child in the 60s in New Orleans, that, any of this kind of thing was going on. But at the same time, my daughter, she just recently watched The Color Purple. And it's been a while since I've read the book, and I've never seen the movie. But she was really engaged with it, which kind of surprised me, because she doesn't get it very deep sometimes, at least not that I'm aware of. But she was asking me about, my experience, and if I found things like that to be true. And what I was reflecting with her was, in living in New Orleans, my parents both worked full time, which was unusual for my mother as a white woman, in the 50s and 60s to be working full time. And so we had a woman who they hired to take care of my brother and myself, and also to do light housekeeping. But it was a time when, my neighbors and friends, they all had black maids, and they all called them by their first name. And, it was just, it was just what they did. But we never called Mrs. Guidry anything but Mrs. Guidry. I mean, that was one standard that my parents always maintained. And, there was always a level of respect for her that I didn't find among my friends for their black, housekeeper maids. And I think, even though we never talked about racial justice in my family, I think there was an undercurrent of just, being led by example. And another story that I told my daughter was, the first Black mayor of New Orleans was Dutch Morial. And he was a lawyer who, before he became mayor, had a law practice. And I have distinct memories of my parents having him sitting in our living room talking about whatever legal needs that my parents had, and that he was their lawyer. And in retrospect, I mean, that was pretty bold of my parents to invite him, first of all, into our home, and secondly, to have him, or even first of all, have him as our lawyer, and then invite him in our home and welcome him as, you know, a professional person. I don't know. Those are the kinds of things that stuck with me. And so, you know, on the one hand, I knew about, you know, the racial segregation that was going on. I mean, I saw the whites only, you know, and no colored here and that kind of thing. But at the same time, my lived experience was somewhat different. And so when we moved to Madison, Wisconsin, I was acutely aware of the inherent racism that was there. You know, people didn't necessarily talk about it, but they certainly acted on it. And I, in my belief, people in the North were more racist than people in the South. At least in the South, they would talk about it and you know, was upfront about it. But in the North, in Madison, you know, there was this subtle, you know, undercurrent that, you know, I don't know how to articulate it any better, but and so seeing, you know, these episodes by Dr. Gates on, you know, all this organization that was going on, I don't know, I'm just thrilled to know that that was happening. And I'm just wondering, you know, how much of that is still occurring? And that's what I really want to know. I mean, I know some of the Black banks are still functioning, and a lot of the Greek organizations from the colleges are still functioning. But what's happening, you know, I mean, there's this whole other level of people who are being lost because of poverty and you know, the redlining, and I don't know, there's a tension there for me as to what's happening and how can it be different or better.
I think that's a great question, and I'm glad Sharon's here. I'm going to say a few words, and then Sharon, I hope you'll pick up. For me, what you were talking about, Ann, just brought back lots of memories of what it felt like to be in the Black community in that time. And I was a kid. And in many respects, we were almost cocooned a little bit within the community from some of the sharp blows and you know, openly racist things that happened when you went outside your community. And whenever we could, many people, like in East Baltimore, where my family comes from, supplied, you know, as much as they could from within, so that if we took an excursion downtown and went to Hutzler's, where my mother couldn't try on the clothes, which is your example of how just nasty the North could be. Gregor's, where the children were allowed, or we went to see my father, who worked as a window dresser at Hutzler's. We would go into this big, beautiful entrance, then go downstairs to the basement and walk among the pipes to the colored restaurant, where the white restaurant, big chandelier hanging on the first floor. All those things very subtly were sort of teaching you your place. But in our community, you know, like the barbershop was a great institution. So when you see these movies about the Black barbershop, that's all true. Any discussion was open, and it was open game on anybody, anything. And somewhere in the course of it, one or two people would come in having what we call liberated some clothing or whatever, and selling it at a gut cheap price. And so there was like little second businesses going on like that, or people in their homes. My grandmother often had dinners to help raise money to pay the note on the house, maybe every 4 months or so. And when word got out that Mama Roxy was having a dinner and she was selling tickets, her tickets sold out like crazy. And you had soul food. It was chitlins, pig feet, stuff like that, greens, cornbread, cakes and pies. But I mean, she would raise enough money to carry her for the next few months at least. Then her brother was involved in the numbers business, the black numbers business. The whole block played it. And so, my grandmother kept a dream book where she could keep trail of which numbers were coming out when. And when someone on the block hit, that was a big, big deal. So it was really a world in itself. And in many ways, it was self-affirming for all the kind of cutting down that occurred outside. But those were my memories. The school system was segregated. There was Dr. Jackson was the colored superintendent, and his office was behind Booker T. Washington Junior High. There were so many ways it was separate, and teachers were separated, were segregated. We were only taught by Black teachers who were unbelievable, and we had fewer resources. But I remember that kind of cocooning, and then only occasionally having to go outside that world, which my parents, of course, had to work in to see what was really being denied. Sharon, would you pop in here? Was your experience any?
My experience was similar, but not so much. I was born and raised in Chicago. Not a much larger city, a much different city than Baltimore. Chicago was a highly and still a highly segregated city, but Blacks weren't the only segregated group in that city. We had segregation in Italian neighborhoods. We had segregation in Hispanic neighborhoods, which was basically Mexican in those days. You had Polish neighborhoods. You had Irish neighborhoods where the traditional stockyards had been historically in Chicago, back of the yards, as it was called. I was heavily Irish. And each those communities, when I look back on it now, they were separate, but there were like what do you call them, safe streets or whatever you want to call it. There were areas where people commingled, and it was not a tension point all the time. My father was a political person. He worked in a Democratic Party. He was a congressional secretary for William L. Dawson. And he actually, William L. Dawson was the first Black chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in Washington. So he had a tendency to go across different areas. He'd take me with him. So I visited people of different colors because he was doing business for one way or the other. Chicago, by the time the downtown area was, I never encountered as much about trying on clothing or going. I remember they bought my shoes at Marshall Fields because I had very long, narrow, skinny feet and couldn't find them most anyplace else. Within the community, we lived on the south side. Living was segregated, yes. We lived on the south side, which was different than the west side of Chicago. But in my teenage years, of course, that was the beginnings of people breaking out of their barriers. I attended an all-Black grade school. It was Catholic, and most of the I'm sorry to say, most of the segregation that I affronted or confronted in my young life came from the nuns. And it was the Sisters of, well, I think they were the Sisters of Mercy, a number of whom were from the South,
Mm.
and they were difficult. And they didn't do much, they didn't do a good job, or they didn't even try, of they were here to educate as much of the children of color, to the degree that the children of color were capable of being educated, because as far as they were concerned, it was like you could make it to the 8th grade level, maybe, and whatever your reading level, math level, etc., was always constrained by your racial identity. So in my younger days, my worst confrontations were with Catholic nuns. Not Chicago, not the people in the streets, not the people on the buses, not walking downtown. My mother used to take me downtown to go to the Christmas parade, to go into the decorated stores, to see all the Christmas decorations. So I didn't feel anything there. The community, now my mother had grown up in a more rigid, and she grew up on Garfield Boulevard. Now Garfield Boulevard used to be a oasis of like what Skip was talking about. There were your own shops for clothing and for provisions, for food, for vegetables, for what have you. My great-grandmother ran a restaurant, Geneva's, that was her name. And she was involved with feeding people. That was one, if you came there, and she had, it was funny, I don't know if you know anything about Garfield Boulevard, but Garfield Boulevard had all the jazz places on it. And in that day, in her day, my mother's day, my grandmother's day, my great-grandmother's day, there was segregated, you couldn't go down. And so the white musicians, jazz musicians, used to come out there after their sets were finished, and they would play with the black music, and they would come around to my great-grandmother's restaurant. So that was kind of different too. So I was aware of things. I was never accosted or in anything except, as I said, in school. I was challenged in school because in my family, my mother and father required me to study. I didn't have to do a whole heck of a lot else, but I had to study, and I had to study hard. And I did well in school. And that was frequently questioned by the nuns. And we had several altercations, or my parents had altercations, where I was accused of cheating. Because it was just not possible in their mind that my brain could absorb anything hardly, and absorb it well. For the institutions that what happened as the civil rights and integration came along, there were things gained and there were things lost. The sense of community and the sense of overwatch by each other in the community. The South Side of Chicago was redlined, and so you had doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, postmen, garbage men, all in the same area. And that made for a richness of interaction that once they broke down the beginnings of redlining, people dispersed. And that was lost. That was until today, I don't think it has ever been, it isn't the cocoon, it isn't the warmth, it's not the caring, it's not the sense of fraternity or sorority that was back there. I felt the end of it into the breakup of it. in
I would,
Chicago.
yeah, I would agree with you. And I think that goes to Ann's comments at the end, like, what about the viability of these institutions today? They're still there and they're still active, but I don't feel the extension of them, as Sharon was saying, that we used to feel. And so many of the things you said, Sharon, are reminiscent of Baltimore. Your Garfield Boulevard is Pennsylvania Avenue for us. All
Mhm.
those local businesses, the Royal Theater, and everything that happened there. And again, for me, uh, Brown versus the Board of Ed happened just as I was coming out of junior high. And up until that time, we were being given a very good education if the teachers felt that they had to make us strong enough to carry on the battle. And I'll give you one example. When Baltimore integrated, and I would be the third class to help integrate City College, what happened was our counselor, Mrs. Croxton, called all the boys in, and she would say, like, to the guys who came before me, some of them were my friends, where are you going to high school? What are your plans? And of course, City and Poly were always the schools in Baltimore, but we just never could go. And I remember, like Robert, I'll never forget his name, a guy ahead of me said, I'm going to City. She said, no, you're not. You're going to Douglas, which was the black high school. She said, and this is why you're going to Douglas. And then she would proceed to tell him about how difficult it was going to be, the image that had to be made, the grades that had to be made to prove that we were as good as anyone else. And so she was visibly, and I remember going in because she had put my friends in Douglas, and she said, ask you, where are you going to high school? And I said, Douglas. She said, no, you're not. You're going to City. And this is why you're going to City. So she was sorting the whole time. But when you got there, you realized why, because in a school that was well over 3,000 and very diverse in terms of socioeconomics among the white students, there were maybe at best 150 Black students. And in my whole freshman class, 59, I think. And of the 59, there were only 4 of us in the enriched course, the high academic course, and all of us came from Booker T. So those were the kinds of things that we were starting. But the Masons are still strong, very strong fraternal organization. The college, the Greek fraternities are strong, but you don't sense and feel them the way you did when, because as Sharon said, everybody was in one neighborhood. My doctor lived 2 blocks from me. My elementary teacher lived 4 blocks from me. I would go around her house and sit at her dining room table, and she would coach me. They were all together. My dad was just a regular worker at Hustlers. But all that was together. And then if the Elks had a parade, or the women who were in the Elks, the parade came right down our street, and they were just dressed and flinging and carrying. And so you felt that you were part of one another there.
And
Yeah,
Skip, what year
Chicago had a
was it
Bud
that you went
Diligence
to,
parade.
what year was it you went to City?
Oh, welcome, Dennis.
right.
I was there from 56 to 59.
56 or 59. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so the third class to come in. Dennis, were you in when Ann asked her question about all the different organizations that Dr. Gates mentioned existed in the Black community to sort of build the community pride and image and support the community, and sort of like, where has some of that strength gone to today, or does it exist today? Is there still that
No,
viability?
I wasn't here for that question, but I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that question.
What was your experience?
Well, for about 7 years, I used to live in Atlantic City,
Mhm,
and I went to Catholic school,
mhm,
Holy Spirit Elementary, and then to Holy Spirit High, which was in Absecon, New Jersey, which is right outside of Atlantic City.
Mhm.
And then after that, my sophomore year, we moved to Baltimore.
In
And
New Jersey, were those Catholic schools basically Black, or were they integrated, or?
they were integrated. They were integrated. Well, I mean, it was diverse, but I don't know if it was really a whole lot of integration. Integration means that you've got more more in numbers, you know. You've
Mhm.
got a parity of numbers between Black and white.
Mhm.
But it was predominantly white, and but there was some Blacks there. But I experienced, you know, no problems in school as far as racism goes. You know, I did when I was in elementary school. One year, I was acting up in line. I was, you know how the kids used to bop when they walk. You know,
Oh,
bopping.
yeah. I always
Yeah,
tried to do it. I couldn't do it.
yeah. Well, I had the gall and audacity to do that while we were walking in line one time, and Sister Conchetta reared back and struck me,
Hmm.
and almost not almost knocked me out. But
Oh, boy.
I've never forgotten that. But she could have told me just to stop doing it. You know.
Mm.
I guess she felt that was the only way to get out to tame my arrogance at that time. I guess I was pretty proud of myself.
You're
Mhm.
bopping.
She wanted to show me different.
But
They
We used to
one
didn't, they
thing
call it
I'd
didn't
the
like,
Diddy
tolerate
Bop.
that.
one thing I would ask you, Dennis, is when you were living in New Jersey, or did you say Atlantic City or Atlanta? I don't remember.
Atlantic City.
Atlantic City.
Uh-huh.
In your day-to-day life, how outside of school, how wide was your perimeter and of what you lived, where you lived? In other words, were you half a mile or 1 square mile, or a larger area where you and your family or felt comfortable or actually circulated? Because that's
Yeah,
something different.
yeah. Well, I used to live on Vermont Avenue, 542 North Vermont Avenue. And in the inlet section of Atlantic City.
Mhm.
So that included mostly Blacks. But at the same time, it included the school that I went to, the elementary school, included the church. And those are the two places that I went to mostly when I was a kid. And so of course, there was the boardwalk. And I had no problems going on the boardwalk. But the thing is, you had to have money if you wanted to enjoy yourself, or maybe a little bit. You didn't need a whole lot of money because everything was inexpensive back then. But people weren't making a lot of money back in those days. I can remember going to see Stevie Wonder for $1
Oh, my
at the Steel
God.
Pier in Atlantic City.
Mm.
Mm.
But mind you, he only sung one song.
For a doll.
For $1.
You
He
got
sung one
$1
song
worth.
and then ran off the stage.
It sounds like there was a, it
But
sounds
it
like there
was
was a big,
terrific. I enjoyed it. I wasn't complaining about it.
It sounds like there was a big difference in cities. And I think Mary Ann's had her hand raised for a while.
Hey, yeah, Mary Ann. Go on.
No, I didn't want to stop this part of the conversation. I'm loving it, but just wanted to affirm what Ann had said originally, that I just found, especially I haven't seen part 3 and 4 of Making Black America, but the first 2 were so powerful for me because they were talking about, and you're using the word cocooning, gathering together and gathering your strength. And the phrasing that was used in some of those programs, they're talking about gathering not just for survival, but for joy. And places where the sanctity of being Black was honored and allowed to flourish. That you were free to be Black, that you could write. Spaces were created where you could write without being under the white gaze, and you could write art, and you could make art, and not just like slavery narratives, but you could allow yourself to dream, despite what else was going on. And that just moved me so much. I have this note: creating spaces where there was Black love, radical empathy, a place for everyone, family, and so you can create in that space. And even saying it again now, that's just very moving and resilient and much to be proud of.
And there were formal rituals too. I just wanted, before I shut up, just mention that, for instance, any formal occasion at church, in our school, Booker T, community meetings, we sang the Black national anthem. We called it the Negro national anthem then. And I mean, everybody knew it. You knew every word, and we sang that.
I just wanted to comment on the spaces, because I teach in a all boys high school, 1,500 kids, 6 through 12, and we have about 20% students of color. A lot of those are Hispanic, but our MACD multi-educational group kind of is packed every day. With the Black students, and it's just a comfortable place. The majority of students are white, and just a place where they can hang out and be comfortable. And I go in there a lot, and just to say hi and see them. And it's so, in any of these predominantly white, as our society, our whole culture and country, are still predominantly white, at least in any of the more, let's say, affluent or businesses and things like that, that whole idea of comfort is just so incredibly important. And that was impressive in that, the networking to create that. So, but it's still happening.
Well, that's great. Anyone else want to comment on what Ann started, or do you want to move to something that moved you one way or another?
Denny and Rita have their hands raised.
Oh, sure. I didn't see. Where's Denny? There you are. Hey, Denny and Rita.
I was going to comment on some of the things I've either seen or watched. Denny and I both read a book about William Still, who's considered the father of the Underground Railroad. And there was one, I think I'd use the word amazing story. And I like this story because it puts it down into one human being and what he went through in order to escape. And he was very human and the way it was portrayed. But at any rate, he decided to ship himself via mail to William Still.
In a crate.
in a crate.
It
And
was 3 feet by, it was 3 feet by 2 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet by 2 feet.
the guy is like 5'8" and
Over
muscular.
200 pounds.
So he's like, he's a big guy. If anybody would have trouble fitting in a 3x2x2 crate, but he is crammed in there. And there's a sign on the crate, this side up. It was about a day and a half long.
Yeah.
I think it was, I can't remember, 2 days long, 3 days
3
long.
days, I think.
Anyway, for a good chunk of the time, somebody put the crate upside down, which means he had his head down. I just can't imagine. I think my head would just pop open if I was upside down for like 12 hours or something. But
He had a bag for food. He had a bag of biscuits
I think he had 2
and,
biscuits.
and a little bit. I don't know if he had any water or
Yeah, he had water in a skin, but
skin. That's right.
considering how much room he had, I don't think he had a lot of room in there for water. So I just thought that it was so amazing that he could fit, so amazing that he could stand being upside down. And then when he finally arrived at William Still's doorstep, they opened up the crate and he like popped up and said, "I'm hungry." So I just thought it, gave a semblance of what it was really like for one person. And another story I wanted to bring up, you talked about things that were shocking. When I watched the life of Harriet Tubman, when his aunt was beat so badly, I couldn't watch. It was so incredibly, and I mean, like, one whipping is sufficient to go on and on and on and on like that. It was just horrible. And I guess my last thing is just a personal thing. I lived in the southern part of Baltimore City, about a mile and a half south of downtown. We just called it South Baltimore. Now it's called Federal Hill. But let me tell you, it was not Federal Hill then. Federal Hill was 1 block long, and the houses cost 10 times more there than where I lived. And anyway, every Sunday in the summer, we used to go to Anne Arundel County to go to the beaches. And at some point when I was a teenager, I think about 16, they mandated to open the beaches to African Americans. And the white people were so upset. And I kept saying to my parents, I said, what do they think the color is going to rub off or something? Why are they so upset? I just thought it was so disgraceful the way the public reacted to the beaches being opened. And the beaches didn't do it willingly. And really, the beaches closed up not long after that. They said it was because of water pollution, but I'm not so sure that was the truth. But anyway.
They thought polluted it.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. But anyway, I just thought it was disgraceful the way people just they're so incensed at the very thought. So anyway, that's all I had to offer.
Oh, you had a lot to offer. Danny, did you want to say more?
I have a little, I think, kind of a positive image. In my town, and Mary Ann knows it, Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, center of the geographic center of the state. When I was high school, middle school, we had one family in the community that was Black, very well respected. The husband was a pastor of a Black church in Bellefonte, and his wife was seamstress, so she did a lot of tailoring to the community. But the really interesting and I think really neat thing about that was their last name. There was another community, another family there, and their last name was Mills. And there were two brothers that I knew like they were just wonderful people. And I played baseball with them and football. And I came to discover that this Mills family were relatives to the Mills brothers, the singing group back in the 30s and 40s, and even into the 50s. And what they would do was they would finish a tour or finish some extended entertainment, and they would come to Bellefonte to relax and to kind of chill and to be and feel comfortable in the community. And I thought that was really cool, really cool, really nice.
Great story. Thank you. I see Maureen, Jerry, Fiokowski's, and Joy DeLambo's hands. Can we just go across the top in that order?
Okay, I want to ask Sharon, because I also grew up on the south side of Chicago. So I was on 50th Street, St. Thomas Apostle Parish. I grew up 50th and Woodlawn. The church was at 55th and Woodlawn. So where were you?
I grew when I was a young child. I grew up at 2912 South Prairie.
Oh,
And I went to a church on Michigan whose name has suddenly just escaped me. That's where I went to kindergarten. And then I was at Holy Angels Church on Oakwood Boulevard for the rest of my time in Chicago. I went to Holy Angels grade school. And I also went to St. Thomas Aquinas High School, which was
so
on
did I.
You went to
Did
St.
we go to
Thomas
high
Aquinas?
school, Sharon?
Oh my God.
Oh my Lord. So I would have been class of 69.
So was I? You were 69. No, I graduated I went from 61 to 65.
All right, so you were there right before me. Good Lord.
But whatever.
You'll sing the school song if you want.
But what happened to the school?
Rise, ye faithful Aquanites. Anyway, that's great. How about that? Say Aquinas.
Oh, we
Yeah.
must talk.
We have, and we saw some changes on the south side, and Aquinas changed, and eventually they tore it down. So
Yeah,
Aquinas
they tore
is
down
no
the
more.
building.
Yeah.
I had,
And that was partly like when I went to Aquinas, there were something like 10 Black kids in my class.
yeah.
And by the 70s, it was all Black. And that was, what happened with South Shore, and then it closed. So that's an interesting thing about this changing neighborhoods and how things were moving. But enough of our trip down memory lane, but sometime we should talk, Sharon, about.
Oh, yes, we must. St. Thomas Aquinas High School. My God.
Yeah.
Talk about the nuns. You probably
Yeah.
have the same teachers.
Yeah, well, those were Dominicans there. They weren't Sisters of Mercy.
But do you remember Sister Rosario?
Yes. Good heavens.
Oh, boy.
We're gonna have to. My sister Deirdre she would have been class of 67. So you might have known Dee Dee. But
we gotta
anyway,
talk.
yeah,
we
we
gotta
do.
talk.
But one thing I've been thinking about, and is I intend to go see the exhibit at the Baltimore Museum of Art about the Great Migration, migrations in every direction. But one thing I've been thinking about lately is about how, there were many positive things about the Great Migration and how it changed the North, and certainly Chicago, and living on the south side of Chicago, was experiencing the Great Migration as it was happening. But also I am aware too, as I talk with people my age and about their family constellations and so on, that the Great Migration did dismantle families or separate families. Certainly it separated generations. Also, sometimes one spouse would say, that's enough, I'm going and I'm taking the kids. or or I'm going and you stay here with the kids. And so there actually was a breaking up of the it's interesting that there's some, and then I think people take those, I think when people are in the middle of a historic movement, you don't know that you're in the middle of a whole movement. You're taking it very personally. So
Mhm.
it's a very personal thing that mommy took us from Alabama and daddy didn't come. And that's, a kid's story. So now they're my generation, and they're still like unraveling what all of that meant. So when I go to see the story of the migrations in every direction, I'll be thinking about that and about how that has had ripple effects on down through the generations about the destabilizing of family. So when we're talking about this changing of institutions, there was this other big historical movement going on that was destabilizing families. So my
Thank you
goodness,
so much
Karen,
for
we'll talk
adding.
about Aquinas sometime.
Oh, yes,
Thank you.
definitely.
Jerry
Definitely.
Fialkowski. This is great.
Yes, I just a couple little things. I just wanted to, the whole South Baltimore land trust thing, it made me think, because the street that they're actually doing now, Hazel Street, I had mentioned that I lived on Hazel Street. The last couple of years of the war, that my grandfather had a barbershop right across from the playground, and those are the houses that South Baltimore Land Trust is going to
Oh
to
my.
now. I mean, I lived with my grandmother because my dad was in the South Pacific with the Army there, and it just makes me so excited that this community group that we're supporting is working on Hazel Street. And Tom's grandmother lived 2 doors from my grandmother, and even though we didn't know each other, our grandmothers came from Poland together and knew each other. And then secondly, when I was a teenager, I lived a little south of Rita. She was on one side of the bridge, I was on the other, and we would go to the Riverside pool. And when we were teenagers, they integrated that pool for the first time. And my mother would give us a quarter so that we could go to the pool. So my 2 little Italian friends and I came from this Polish Irish community to swim in South Baltimore at the pool. And a lot of the little white kids wouldn't come anymore after they integrated the pool, but our parents didn't stop us. And the third thing is the kind of hope. I watched the Tubman and the Booker T. Washington documentaries, and like someone else said, the Harriet Tubman one, actually, it brought me to tears. But what I wanted to say is that this whole thing, us in what we're doing, there's several people just on the We Have a Dream group go to City Springs, and the joy of being with these children at City Springs. I'm just going to cry telling you about it. But I mean, like in the first couple weeks, some little guy said to me, "You look like the Queen of England." And we died, and I said, "Is that because I'm old?" And he said, "Yes." And well, that's right. I am old, but not quite as old as the Queen of England was. And he said, "Well, how old are you?" Which is a loaded question to ask any little kid. And I knew that, because if you're 20, you're old when you're only 6.
Yeah.
And I think you might be around 99. I said, "That's close." And but wait to this. He said, "But you're not as old as that man that brings you on Tuesdays. And that's in Miss Bartholomew's class." I said, "No, he's much older. That's my husband." I mean, I was thinking of like the beatings that the children got in those stories, that not that some of these kids don't have a hard go of it. These kids have a hard go of it, but they're so beautiful, and they could say all those kind of things to me, and I could laugh and love them more. But that wasn't the case of the history, that these little kids could have addressed a white woman like that and told her that she looked 99 and her husband looked like an old man. I mean, we just, I'm just so hopeful about what we're doing. I just wanted to bring that up. I'm glad we're all seeing these things and we're learning this so that we can't possibly ever forget. But the lovely things that are happening are good. They are good. And these children are they're just so beautiful, and they're so smart, and they're so funny. I'm just so hopeful.
Thank you for sharing that. It was beautiful. My Jerry DeLambo. Hi, buddy. Unmute yourself.
All right. So this isn't a story or anything, but if anybody has a chance and you haven't seen a movie called Something the Lord Made, I don't know, are you aware of it?
Tell us
Well,
about it.
anyway, it's a wonderful story, and it's about it's about a doctor, but he never really becomes a doctor. His name is Vivian Thomas, and he's from Nashville, and he goes to work for a doctor as a janitor, and the doctor's name is Alfred Blaylock. And Alfred Blaylock was instrumental in finding a cure for what they call blue babies. So what happens, Vivian realizes he can't go to college. There was a run on the bank. This is in the 1930s. Something happened. All the money that he had saved to go to medical school was gone. So he marries his girlfriend, and they follow Dr. Blaylock up here to Baltimore to Johns Hopkins University. I mean, Johns Hopkins Hospital. And Dr. Blaylock helps a doctor named Helen Tossin, and he helped her to develop a cure for blue babies. And it was with Vivian Thomas's instrumental hands and how he could help actually perform the operations and found a cure for these babies. And it was just a wonderful story, but he never got the recognition. He was still, for a while, even when he was at Hopkins working with Dr. Blaylock, he was still paid the wages of a janitor. And he was walking with Dr. Tossin one day, and he said to her, gee, you're the first woman doctor, that I've ever met. And she goes, yeah, she says, but at least they let me through the front door. They wouldn't let Vivian Thomas through the front door. He was walking with Dr. Blaylock, and Blaylock said to the guard, well, he's with me, he's working with me. And the guard was like, I can't come in the front door. So he had to go all the way around and enter the hospital through the back door because it was black. But he did assist in an operation on a blue baby that saved her life. And but he never became a doctor. And like I say, the recognition seemed to all go to Blaylock. But everybody watching the movie knew, what the true story was. It's a wonderful movie. It's a true story. And, it was Alan Rickman who played Blaylock, and then a singer named Moz Duff, who played Vivian Thomas. His mom named him Vivian because she had thought she was going to have a girl. And she just decided that that's what she would name him. But it also it shows you how strange things were back then. Like people would be walking on the grounds of Hopkins Hospital. And, actually that wasn't in Hopkins, it was when they were in Nashville. And black people like move aside to let white people go by. And it just kind of, it just reeked of old days racism, which it was just really, but it's a wonderful story, and it teaches you a lesson about You know, how even a great person who's done so much, how much racism had played a part in the kind of recognition, you know, he didn't get, but should have gotten. We all knew the truth.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And I think several years ago, Hopkins did put a plaque or something up to Vivian Thomas to recognize his contributions. I'd forgotten all about that. Thank you so much for sharing.
There is a plaque. It's a great movie. If anybody hasn't seen it,
I've seen it.
something that you know.
Karen?
Did you
I've
see
seen it.
Can I just say, so they've named a high school for him, the Vivian
Really?
Thomas Medical Arts Academy. And this fall, right, you know, August of 22, they admitted they've got a whole new program at Johns Hopkins University, and they admitted the first Vivian Thomas PhD scholars.
Wow.
That started this fall, and they are pursuing PhDs in STEM, and it's part of the was funded with $150 million from Bloomberg. So
Wow.
they are honoring Vivian Thomas now belatedly, but so that whole cohort of PhD students started this August. So
That's beautiful.
Thank you
yeah.
for telling us that. It's great.
Beautiful. Karen, did you want to say something?
Vivian Thomas, there's not only just a plaque. Hopkins has that wall of honor somewhere,
Mhm.
but and in that wall of honor, which starts from the old building, there's a picture of Vivian Thomas now, and it's very closely associated with the character, and I can't remember, Alan Rickman played, but Vivian Thomas, and I've seen the movie. And in the end, Vivian Thomas, I think, actually lived longer than Blaylock did. But in any case, he eventually was recognized amongst his peers to a degree. He never was able to go to college and become a real doctor. But he got to come in the front door finally, and various things like that. But there is a picture of him in Hopkins, walls of honor.
Beautiful. Peggy, did you have your hand up?
I
And
do,
also, I
because
wanted to also mention, when we were talking about Harriet Tubman, you were so moved by that. I didn't know if you remembered any specific thing that you
I
wanted
was going to tell you a few things, but before that, I have to tell you, this is another sign of the systemic racism, and it has to do with health. As Jerry mentioned at City Springs, when I told my class that my mom died at 101, one of the kids came up to me during break and said, "Was your mom famous?"
Oh,
Just because she reached an age of 101, he thought she was famous. So the health differences and the ages to which we survive systemic racism.
yeah.
But as you said, Skip, if you haven't seen the Harriet Tubman, I have never been so moved by anything in my life. I didn't know all of those things about her, that she was a general, that last trip, she had 800 slaves that she was able to save, that she ran into William Still, the father of the underground, and that this is another systemic thing, that he was keeping records so that eventually he could help reunite families that were so separated by people escaping, and that she escaped a couple of times. Her brothers took her back one time, her husband wouldn't go with her, and I thought it was so sad that when she finally went back to get her husband out, he'd remarried. I mean, it was just the courage of this woman when they talk
Amazing.
about what they did to people who were caught, the branding and the maiming, and she just back and forth and back and forth. I just blew my mind how incredible this woman was. And if you have not seen that Harriet Tubman one, I mean, I think I've watched all the 4 Making Black America and how it was 2 separate worlds and Frederick Douglass, but nothing blew me away like Harriet Tubman. So anyway, I would say, please watch it.
Rita and Denny, was your hand up?
Yeah, This happened recently, this past summer. Rita and I went to visit Lisa in her farm, and they're fostering a young girl. She's a second grader, biracial, and she's this doll baby. She is such a sweetheart. But we went to the community pool, and this is basically an observation I made. The community is really diverse. It's, white, it's Black, it's Hispanic, and Asian. But what was interesting observation I made was I was in the water with Tylena, that's her name, and we were swimming around and playing around in the water. And I looked around when it was a lull in our activity, and this whole section is a pretty large community pool, and this whole section where most of the adults were swimming, I was the only white person in it. It was Hispanics and Black people. Now, I don't know if it was on purpose, but it was just an observation that I made that I said, I thought, what's going on here? Because there were a lot of little kids and they were in the wading pools and everything, but there were still a lot of adults, but they weren't in that pool. And then the pool's basically divided with floats, lines with floats on them to separate different sections of the pool. And there must have been maybe 30 or 40 people in this section of the pool. And I was the only white person in that pool. And Tylena was the only biracial person in that pool. It was just an observation that I made.
You made me want to share with you, just to show you how late some of these things went on. We didn't often go south because we knew it wouldn't be a pleasant experience. But I had a friend who worked for the Rouse Company, and Columbia had been built. And Rouse had the practice that places that he had as vacation spots, if he wasn't using them, you could rent them if you were an employee, and you could have a vacation. So my friend Gary invited Pam and me, and Justin hadn't been born. She was carrying him in the womb, so Candace would have been about 3. And we joined them down there. And where we went, where this place was not, of course, in the Black part of Myrtle Beach. So when we got on the elevator, you could feel the estrangement around us. But when Pam and Gary's wife took the kids to the pool later that afternoon, as soon as the 2 women and their little son and little Candace got in the pool, everybody else cleared out, everybody. And so when they came back in, they were just commenting on it. And Pam said, well, we've got plenty of swimming pool all to ourselves, folks. And then in the course of the week that we were down there, Candace became ill. And so Pam took her to the pediatrician. So when we got there, the nurse kept trying to make Pam go down the hall. Go down the hall, she said, go down the hall. So Pam went down the hall because the waiting rooms were separate. This is in the 80s, okay? We're talking like 1984, 85. And when Pam got down there and realized that she was trying to get her to go to the colored waiting room, she just turned around and came back. But we were just amazed at some of the things that persisted. And the last night we were there, we went to a restaurant. We were the only people of color in the restaurant. And we noticed when we were sitting that all the other Black people, who were either like bussing the table or in the kitchen, they were pressed at the doors looking through at us. And when we left, all of them had come out into the hallway and they were just shaking our hands and everything.
Wow.
But so it dies hard and it dies long.
There's a positive note. Some of you know how involved I am with Penn State sports.
Yeah,
Right,
just like,
Janet? Anyway, this event actually happened, and I think a lot of us are aware of the "We Are Penn State" cheer or chant. Well, that "We Are" is not a cheer. That came out of an event where the Penn State football team was playing a team in Florida. I think it may have been Miami, and they had a scheduled game. And when the team got there, they traveled by train. Then Penn State had 2 black football players, and one of them became the first black football player to be selected in the National Football League. But at any rate, they were not the people when they got to Miami. They weren't going to be allowed to stay with the rest of the football team. And the captain of the team gathered the team together in I don't know where it was. It was a big room. They had to be a big room because the whole team, it must have been about 60, 70, 80 people. And these 2 black men were there with them. And he stood up and started talking. He said, "We are Penn State, and we do not separate our team and our group. We are not going to do this. We are one team. We are all together in this, and we are going to stay together." And when the hotel / community said they are not going to stay with the white players, Penn State got back on the train and went back to State College and didn't play the football game.
wow.
I thought that was an awesome move. And that's where the term "We Are" comes from that event. It also happened shortly afterwards, 2 years later, when they went to the Cotton Bowl and they played SMU with Doak Walker, and they tried to separate the team again because they had more black players, and they wouldn't do it, and they finally ended up being housed on a Air Force, either an Air Force base or an Army base, and not in a hotel, but they were all together. And that kept that solidity and that idea of we're one, and has nothing to do with separating with color or anything. We are together. We're in this together, and we stay together. So
Good for them.
that's my
you.
little Penn State interim.
Thank you. Now,
Marianne, you're muted.
as we move to Marianne and Jody, I just want to say it's clear that what you've read, seen, has aroused in all of us very, very deep memories and reminiscences about what was happening in our youth, in our earlier days, and where we are now, and how do you evaluate where we were and how far we've come. Okay, so Marianne and then Jody.
I'm just pulling a variety of things together. Peggy, listening to you talk about Harriet Tubman, and I'm not sure whether it was Harriet Tubman or Frederick Douglass that kept showing pictures of Black children from, the time of both of them. And I just remember feeling kind of haunted by those pictures of those kids. They were so serious. They were almost kind of hopeless. And the images captured in the photography are just so painful when you think of what kind of life did they have, what kind of life did they look forward to. And then to compare, Jerry, with what you're saying about the kiddies at City Springs, But I'm just remembering now how much that moved me. Also,
Mm.
I've been doing a lot of reading. And one of the things I read, Maureen reminds me of what you said about separation of families. I don't know if anyone is familiar with The Personal Librarian, the novel about J.P. Morgan's personal librarian, Belle DaCosta Green. She was Black and she passed as white. And she spent her whole life in this very upper echelon of society, amassing J.P. Morgan's incredible art collection, and all the time hiding the secret of the fact that her mother decided to raise the children as white so that they would have a chance. And it caused a split between her mother and her father, because her father wanted them to be proud of who they were. And he was working for recognition for Black people. And the mom is like, but they're never going to have a chance. And this is based on truth. It was a historical novel, but I went back and I looked and what she had to go through to hide who she really was. And the other thing I finished reading, which really, really moved me, you know, I'm a novel person. The novel by Angie Thomas called The Hate You Give. It is, and that's a quote from Tupac, as I found out, which I didn't know anything about. But it's a novel narrated by a 16-year-old girl who witnesses the killing of her best friend by a policeman, totally unprovoked. And what she goes through as the only witness. And Al started reading it and he said, is this based on a true story? And I said, I think it's based on many true stories. And it talks about, you know, what the cops are thinking and the complication of the fact that her uncle is a cop, and that her dad used to be part of a gang and walked away. And it's very layered. And again, for a young adult novel, I was riveted. It was very painful, sort of hopeful at the end, but it just, you know, it's very much more Black Lives Matter. A lot of things we've been reading are older, but this particular book takes it right up to last week.
Wow.
And I'll put
Brian,
it.
why don't you write that up for the bibliography?
I will, and I'll send it to Jack.
That would be-
I hadn't had a
Great.
chance to do that.
That would be good.
That's good.
And I think we
Jody?
need to take.
Yeah, I'm
Jody
going to
and
have
Jack.
Jody, Peggy, and then going to turn it over to you to make the transition.
Yeah, so this isn't actually why I raised my hand, but after Dennis talked about Penn State, one of our students from my school, his mother wrote a child's book about the Penn State story. That's why I got up. I went to go see if I could find it, but in my move, I'm not exactly sure where it ended up. So for one of our meetings, I'll hold it up, or I'll take a picture of it and put it in the in an email. And one of my other students, he and a Black man right out of college, they wrote a book that's a good one for also like junior high. It's called All American Boys, and it's kind of this similar story to what you were just talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, he was one of my students, and it's a, you know, it's a nice, it's a story again, a black boy hurt by a policeman, and then there's a family connection and all of that. But the reason I raised my hand initially is that I've just been thinking so much about the whole American Christianity and white supremacy. And there were two lines in the Harriet Tubman movie that just so struck me. I mean, I've always thought, how could people have slaves? And I mean, remember, a lot of these people were religious, and I mean, you can't read the Gospels and like think any of this makes any sense. And the two lines in the movie that really struck me were that the core of slavery is the disunion of family. And I mean, family is just one of those precious things that we all aspire, you know, to have, and to have a wonderful, I don't know, it just seems like that, you know, the church's family, we call our church family and all of that. So just that's what slavery was supposed to be, is just feels impossible to me, like how that could happen. And the other one was that, buying slaves was prestige for whites. So if you had a slave, then you were higher up. And if that's not the absolute reverse of the gospel. So I just have such trouble figuring out how people could in any way reconcile this with their religious beliefs. And that's not in any way and anything more than a question, and I just don't understand it ever. So
I don't think anyone fully does. I think part of it is the dehumanization process. If you think about it, if you consider them property, and then if you treat them the way you would if you were breeding your dogs, you sell the puppies, cats, you sell the kittens. And you're right, it's all about breaking apart family. But I think you rationalize to yourself that they're not equal to you. They're not fully human, they're property. And then what can you do? Peggy.
Let Jack Jack
Oh,
will be
I'm
our
sorry.
last one, and then we'll move on. Yes, Jack. You're muted. You're muted.
I was really moved by the Harriet Tubman film too, but I wanted to mention a couple things from the Becoming Frederick Douglass that I thought were kind of interesting. I mean, here was a fellow that he didn't know his father. He only had some contact with his mother, and that at age 6 he was separated from his grandmother to become a slave. So that started it off, and then all that he did to learn how to read and write, to trade biscuits so that somebody would tell him what a word meant. And then the other thing that shocked me was, we know how cruel the owners of slaves were, but they actually had, and he mentioned it, and he was subject to it, was a slave breaker. So can you imagine how terrible somebody must have been to be a slave breaker? And then also in the film, they mentioned the Fugitive Slave Acts, which I thought were so interesting. Here was the Congress of the United States, and imposing penalties on not only for the runaway slaves, but for anyone that helped them get away. So I thought I just learned an awful lot from that film.
I agree. It reminds you of some of the abortion laws going into effect, that if you drive a person, you can be held accountable also. But I agree, Jack. This book, if anybody wants to borrow it, has some of the Maryland historical things. And it was talking a lot about that fugitive slave law and what it did. And also in the book reviews that they do in the back, there are a lot of books that they mention that would be good. And The Black Butterfly is in there. But Denny, can I run through a few things first and then come back to you if we could? Because I just want to make sure if anybody has to leave, I'm trying to be alert to the time here. Anyway, thank you all so much. A wonderful conversation. I think we all experienced some excellent reading and watching. And we talked about having December as a reading month, since the third Wednesday falls on the 21st. And many people will be cooking or cleaning or traveling. So if there's a book or an article or something else you would like to recommend, please speak up or let Jack know for the bibliography. Or if you heard something tonight that maybe enticed you, I actually have reservations for the exhibit at the Baltimore Museum of Art. So I'm looking forward to that. So that's something you can do during December. And we did arrange with Colleen to be able to view the Father Brian Massengale and Robert P. Jones conversation regarding white supremacy and American Christianity. And I have already seen it, but it was really good. I'm looking forward to seeing it again. So that will be our January 18th in-person meeting at St. V's. It'll be at 7 o'clock, our normal time. It's a Wednesday night. So we will be viewing that conversation regarding white supremacy and American Christianity. And we're going to set January 25th, the following Wednesday, as a weather date, just in case the 18th is really bad. We'll move it to the 25th. And we'd like to open this to other parishes. So please spread the word if you can. And I was wondering if anybody would be willing to do some advertising for this. Would anybody like to take that on or contact other parishes?
Yeah, what do
I
you
can
mean by
make some
advertising?
flyers. Sorry.
Just to advertise it to other places, other parishes, just to try to get some more people. It's such a great conversation, and sometimes we feel like we're preaching to the choir when we hear these things, but there are definitely churches, I think, that could appreciate it. I know a couple places that I can notify.
I can make flyers since I won't be able to be there.
That would be beautiful.
Great, Jody. We thought about maybe having soup and bread. Would anybody be willing to kind of organize that a little? Rita, thank
Thank
you.
you, Rita.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I am going to be out of town, unfortunately, for that most of that week. That's very disappointing, but that's when that's going to be.
Sorry. Well, I did attach the link to that last email, so you'll be able to watch it anyway. It is really, really good. And then I just wanted to mention that last year we worked for police reform, and Serge had asked us to vote for question H on the ballot in Baltimore City. So I wanted to let you know that did pass if you didn't realize that. That was for control of the city police department. And unfortunately, the city term limits also passed, which they were against. So that one passed. So one passed and one lost. So I also want to thank you all for your continued efforts to improve equity in our city and learning by viewing some of these things that we've been sending out, or attending the SBCLT event, which I really appreciated Maureen writing that up. And it was in the e-news. Hopefully you saw what she wrote about. And so
Yes.
thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Maureen. And so that was wonderful. And if we have extra time here, maybe I'll see if she wants to say anything about it. But you all are a blessing. There's no doubt about it. And tomorrow night, if you are able, please attend the 5 p.m. City Council meeting. We are for Council Bill 22-0195.
Very good.
And apparently my district, District 11, so Jack, that would include you and some of our other parishioners, Eric Costello opposes the bill. So if you could take a moment tonight or tomorrow morning to write or to call him, or even if you're not in that district, to make sure that you wouldn't have to, Maureen, because we know Odette sponsored the bill, but anybody in other districts, if you could just let them know that you definitely are for CB 22-0195.
Which is the inclusionary housing bill, inclusionary housing.
Thanks.
Right. And we also want
anyone
to
can
not
call the mayor too. The mayor also needs to be convinced.
And not just that we want that bill passed, but also no amendments to weaken it. And so to reach your council person, it's usually their first name dot their last name at baltimorecity.gov. So I can share a screen to show the district reps if anybody doesn't know who their district rep is, their city rep. I can show that if you want to stay on, I can do that. But let me just ask, so Anne was going to do our prayer. Can we let Denny have the floor for a second, Anne, or do you need to be anywhere? You're okay? Okay, Denny?
Yeah.
It's just very short. Jack mentioned the fugitive slave law, and in the book about William Still, he makes a big deal out of that. It changed everybody's lives up north. William Still lived in Pennsylvania, and it just made life so frightful for all the Black people, because many people had been freed for one reason or another, or they had escaped years and years ago, or their parents had escaped, and then this put all of their lives in incredible danger. It was a really terrible step in the way things progressed.
Yeah,
agree.
everyone, oops, I'm sorry, I just want to say the whole history of our country, from the formation of the Constitution to the Fugitive Slave Act to what we're doing now, is a history of concession to the South, so they wouldn't secede or whatever. And I, for one, am sick of it.
Yeah. And some of these articles and things I've been reading, it was so horrifying that it didn't matter. Like you said, if you were free or enslaved, if you're free, they could still haul you back and say you were a slave, and put in that fugitive law made that everything okay to do that, going into Pennsylvania and dragging those people back, whether they had been enslaved or free. So nauseating, just nauseating. Yeah, Maureen.
And I just want to say something positive, though, about the present and the future. You're talking about the different institutions and what's continuing and who's in leadership and so on. So I've been working with the Inclusionary Housing Coalition, which Beyond the Boundaries Catholic group can be very proud that we're the initiating group of this. And inclusionary housing has been an issue for St. Vincent's since 1995. We've been talking about this. So longer than some of the people that I'm working with on this coalition have been alive, I've been working on this issue. But I want you to feel encouraged and excited about what I'm seeing both at the South Baltimore Community Land Trust and in the Inclusionary Housing Coalition. I am working with people who are under 40 years old and Black, mostly people of color, but of all sorts. So I'm telling you, so these are some of the young people of color who are leading, and they have political sophistication way beyond, way beyond mine. I mean, it's really wonderful. And so the head of Citizens Planning and Housing Authority, Baltimore's Renters United, the NAACP, the ACLU, SEIU 1199, the Community Development Network. These are just the people who are going to be talking tomorrow night that I work with. These are all people of color, young people with great political sophistication. And I also saw that with the South Baltimore Community Land Trust. Melanie Thomas is a fantastic, sophisticated, capable leader. And the coalitions that she's working with, the other group, the Lawyers for Civil Rights, the Annika, who was at the event that we were at the other night and also is on this coalition. These are people, the torch is being carried by some really competent people. So that, like the South Baltimore Community Land Trust is working with the Zero Waste Initiative. This is going to be huge. Well, a whole variety of things related to waste and environment and environmental justice, and then housing justice, which we, Beyond the Boundaries has always tried to focus on housing because of our understanding of redlining and systemic segregation and so on. So this Inclusionary Housing Coalition is really exciting. I think Beyond the Boundaries has been a great leader in this effort. And so we really could use anybody who can come tomorrow. It's going to start at 5, but if you could drop in even later or just for a little while or just to swell the ranks, they are, well, it's going to be a hard fight and we're probably going to lose, but we still have to be in there and do the fighting. But so they've made it very difficult, changed our date 4 times for the hearing and made it very difficult to organize people, but we'd be most grateful. Or if you could just call City Hall, call your representative and say that you support inclusionary housing, that you believe in economically and racially diverse neighborhoods. So, yeah. But
I was on another Zoom this week. It was a zero waste one that Shoshana was on from SBCLT. And so, yeah, they really are doing a great job. So. Appreciate that. I assume those are old hands, Jack and Rita and
Oh,
Denny.
yeah.
We can go to prayer. All right, Anne is going to lead us in prayer.
It's going to be
So-
short and sweet.
Okay.
Father God, we thank you for giving us this time together tonight. Our desire for racial justice is genuine. We ask the Holy Spirit to continue to fill us with grace so that we can continue to be open to changing our hearts. In Jesus' most holy name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank
much,
you all for a
Ann.
wonderful evening.
Good night,
And if-
everyone. Thank you.
And if anybody's interested in doing the prayer for any of these meetings, please just let me know, okay? Thank you all for coming.
Peggy.
Thank you.
Yes,
Peggy,
Dennis, I'm still on.
Could you give me the name of the
Your district.
yeah, the district, the city council district?
Do you know
You
what
have
number
that,
you're
you have that
in?
list?
Do you know? I do. Do you know what number you're in? What district number you're in? I'm gonna share my screen.
So Jack and Denny, Dennis, could you come tomorrow?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Oh, thank you. Okay, that'd be great.
All right,
Mhm.
so here are the, so let's see.
trying to
I'm in.
I know I would recognize him if I see him.
Okay, let's just say the names, and you might be in one. Zeke Cohen.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
Okay, so you're north of that then. That's down east, I think that's federal, not federal, Little Italy in that area going east down there.
Fells Point and stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Canton.
So Danielle McCrae, Ryan Dorsey, Mark Conway, Isaac Sheffer, Yitzi, Sharon, I'm
Yitzi
probably
Schaefer.
mispronouncing these, sorry. Quit laughing at me, Maureen. Sharon Middleton, James Torrance, Christopher Burnett, John Bufflock, I think.
Oh, there he
Hola.
is. Antonio Glover. That's the guy.
Antonio.
Glover,
Okay, so
okay.
you're District 13 then.
Yeah.
So his is Antonio.Glover at BaltimoreCity.gov. Anybody else want theirs?
Just Costello's been the one opposing this. He
Right,
just
he's mine,
supports
right
the
here.
Developers.
Eric
So.
Costello.
Yeah.
Where is
he's-
that district, Maureen?
So he's all the Inner Harbor where all the
Downtown.
luxury development has been going on, and he doesn't.
Ah,
you know,
And
that's-
Federal Hill.
Yeah,
yeah,
he encircles the harbor.
Mhm.
okay.
But it stops, it looks like it stops the map. It looks like it stops, what about President Street, do you think,
Yeah,
Maureen?
something like that. Yeah, he's not east. He's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because
He's
Pratt
south.
Street is in there in Lombard, so it looks like it stops about there.
Yeah. There is a map. You can look at the districts, another link. If you go up, maybe, I don't know. Peggy,
Yeah, I was looking, I think
Switch to the
Robert
map.
Stokes, District 12, is that what St. Vincent's is in? Maybe?
No, I think
Mm-mm.
St. Vincent's is 2.
It's 02. Yeah,
Two.
21202. That's a zip.
Danielle
Well-
McCrae, okay. Oh, no, not the zip code, I mean the district.
No, I don't think.
No,
I
the
don't-
museum is
if you
02.
Click on your find your count. There's a map anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
I looked at it earlier today, but I didn't,
No,
know.
they
of
don't show the
there.
actual map. Yeah. But anyway. Everybody needs a little push. It hasn't been on their radar that we really care about it. And then once they found out that we did, I mean, they scheduled us for Monday and then for
I know.
Tuesday and then for Wednesday and then for
know.
Thursday. So, making it very difficult for us to rally our troops. So, but we will be there. About 12 of us are going to speak. So, but the city powers are opposed to it, I think. The Department of Housing and Community Development is not entirely on our side. And if they're not, it's going to be a hard fight.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
a losing fight.
I
So
know.
Maureen, why are they opposing it? What,
They
is best?
feel that so they want development, including luxury development. They want new construction, they want new, and the developers say that, yeah, they want to build, but they need big subsidies to do it. So we handed them big checks, many millions of dollars, even hundreds of millions have been
Mhm.
given to the developers over the last 15 years. And it's resulted in 15 years, 37 affordable units.
Oh,
Horrible.
So, so the developers would like that to continue just that way. Because the developers feel, give us big subsidies and then we will create luxury dwellings with a higher profit margin.
sure.
And what we are saying is that if you get a big subsidy, we want a proportion of that to be
Inclusion. Yeah.
affordable. And by affordable, we're talking about 67,000 for a family of two. We're not talking
Sure.
about poor people, okay? We're talking
No.
about just normal people who
Normal
make a
people.
and so that is that's the difficulty
Yep.
that we're dealing with right now. Actually, 55,000 for a household of
Yeah, I
two.
thought it was.
So that's I just think the developers feel like everything is just fine the way it's going. They're getting what are called TIFs, taxing increment financing, and what is low interest housing tax credits. So they're told you can build this. I mean, some of these high-rise developments pay less in property taxes than I do
Oh, sure.
And
for the whole building.
the affordable house, the law that was passed a while back, if they didn't provide so many units, if they're over 30 units, they had to put money in that fund. So
Yeah, well,
that never had any teeth. That's right. I mean, I know there's a little money in
the
there,
old
but it
law
never-
was weak and it needed work
Right.
and it didn't function. And we all agreed that it needed to be amended and it was sunsetting, and St. Vincent's organized around this before, that we
Yeah.
didn't want it to have a sunset. We wanted it extended. We wanted a better law. We've been through this fight now twice. It's yeah, there's a lot of sort of in the weeds. If you come tomorrow, you'll hear real experts on this. I mean, people from all different, including our own, Matt Hill is so Odette Ramos and Matt Hill are two of the greatest champions of affordable housing in the city. And they both go to St. Vincent. So we have such a wonderful parish.
Yes, we
with
do.
really capable, wonderful activists.
Y'all,
So,
I'm going to stop the recording now. I just realized before I.
oh
put it-
yeah, right. We're recording.